Are you a sex worker looking to build a new website or a website redesign? Then you'll want to consider Fox Digital. They did a fantastic job designing my website, Stripped by Sia. If you want your website done, mention that you're a listener of the show at foxdigital.design for 20% off. Tell them I sent ya. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. Hello, I am your host, Steph Sia, aka Kimchi on stage. I just finished 2 weeks of dancing at the wonderful Penthouse nightclub in Vancouver. Very cool to see some people coming out and saying hello from different parts of the world, which is cool. I had a couple Americans that listened to the show that came in, which is super exciting. Thank you again. Shout out to Steve. Had a great chat with you. That was awesome. And thanks for tipping. Yay. As you should, by the way, if you go to strip club, you should be going there. Right? So that is that. I'm a dancer. I don't know when I'll be back on stage because some crazy things are happening, aka, and I've been keeping this under wraps for a while, but I'm getting married in a couple weeks. I'm really trying to provide some exciting episodes for you all, including today's episode, which if you're hearing some cheering and excitable giggles in the background, you will soon find out who our guest is today. But of course, if you're listening, you probably already know who it is. But just kind of go through all the things here. Besides being a dancer, I'm also a digital content creator. So I do have an OnlyFans, make custom videos there. I am a cam model on Stream8, which is a really fun platform. Feel free to go check it out. I'm Sia on camera on that platform. And I was also a sugar baby for a number of years, and that was kind of my start into the industry, even though I was like unknowingly or didn't really consider it as work. Long story. Please listen to the bonus episodes in season 1 if you're interested in hearing about that, because this show is not about me. This show is all about destigmatizing sex work, and I do that by bringing on different guests every single week from every single corner of the industry. So I'm not just talking about talent. I'm not just talking about cam models. I'm not talking about strippers, but I'm also talking about people from sex worker adjacent or like sex worker organizations that help benefit sex workers. I'm also talking about people in the background as well. Maybe they're producers. Maybe they're people on legal teams that also help navigate the issues that sex workers go through, because there are a lot of issues and challenges that we go through because of the nature of our work. So I really try to bring someone new on, something different, a different topic every single week, so we can really truly understand the work it is that we do, and also learn to humanize sex workers, and also educate all you folks that are actually not in the industry, because there are a lot of you listeners that are not in the industry, which is very, very cool that you're listening to this to educate yourselves. So that's just kind of what I've been doing for the past almost 4 years, continuing to do that and continuing to bring on some fabulous guests on like today. But I know we're patiently waiting to hear who we're bringing on today, but I just wanted to go ahead and say hello to the lovely Patreon subscribers. Patreon subscribers, you guys are awesome. You are amazing. You are helping basically fund my upcoming trip to XBiz. You've also helped me get a wonderful website up, which has been very helpful in the past year as well. That money goes towards that. So for as low as $4 a month, you can go ahead and check out the different tiers there. You get video exclusives on there. Now we have full recordings of the episodes that are upcoming. And you do get that ahead of time before anyone else, which is exciting. Also, all of my bonus episodes are on there now as well. There's many bonus episodes that are on there. Another one coming up real soon, so stay tuned on that. But if you're interested in helping the show financially, you can check it out. It's patreon.com/strippedbysia. Again, patreon.com/strippedbysia. And if you're interested, I mean, now is a really good time to join, because our guests will be showing some really, really cool things on camera today, some sneak peek things. So stay tuned on that. But I also want to give a nice little lovely shout out to my network as well. So Skyhawk After Dark, which is another adult industry related podcast and videocast network. So shows like mine, I mean, if you're enjoying content like this, and if you're enjoying the guests that I bring on, a lot of them do have their own independent podcasts as well. So if you're if you want to learn more, or interested in learning about more about the industry and other facets and stuff like that, feel free to check it out. It's skyhawkafterdarktv.com. I feel really rusty today. Last but not least, I did mention my website being funded by our lovely sponsor, who's also a friend of mine, who's also here in Canada as well. His name is Anthony. He runs Fox Digital, which is a sex worker friendly website maker. He made my website completely from scratch, but if you do have an existing website, he's welcome to do a nice little overhaul for you. If you need a bit of a makeover, whatever you need, he's actually giving Strip by Sia listeners 20% off. So if you're interested in kind of just getting your foot in the door and, wanting to get something done, feel free to reach out to him. His name is Anthony. Tell him I sent you for 20% off. It's foxdigital.design. Okay, we finally made it here. I'm really excited to chat about all the things today. I don't even know how we're going to talk about all the things that we want to talk about in an hour, but we're going to try. This is a fan requested episode, which I'm super stoked about. I love fan requested episodes. Super stoked to bring the Cupcake Girls organization on to the show this week. And here joining me today is Amy-Marie Merrell, who is the executive director of the Cupcake Girls organization. If you haven't heard, hello. And I love your laugh. You've been waiting so patiently as I ramble on and on for the past 7 minutes.
I could listen to you talk forever, and I guess I will for the next hour. So I'm
doing my spiel of talking now, and then Amy, you're going to be taking over right after this, which I'm stoked about. Amy is equally passionate about sex work, also decriminalization. Again, she is the executive director of the Cupcake Girls organization, which is an organization based in the United States, which provides confidential support to those involved in the sex industry, as well as providing trauma-informed outreach, advocacy, resources, and aftercare to those affected by sex trafficking. It is a huge, huge, huge deal, and also a really important conversation that we need to have today about, nonprofits, sex trafficking survivors, the conflation between trafficking and sex work, which is not the same thing. Also, what else were we talking about? Saviorism. It's gonna be a fully packed episode, so please have your AirPods in tightly. You don't want to miss a beat. But Amy, I just kind of read on the website and stalked you a little bit online on Twitter. That's what I think I know about you, but I'm happy for you to tell the audience in your own words and terms who you are or who you think you are.
Who I think I am. Oh gosh. So my name's Amy-Marie Merrell. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a survivor of sexual violence and domestic violence. And I have been working with sex workers and sex trafficking survivors since 2006. I'm also a single mama to an amazing 8-year-old. And I've rescued dogs my whole life. But the current pup that I'm enjoying and getting to live with, who's just a joy in our lives, is Luna, German Shepherd Boxer mix. Shout out to all the animal shelters who are doing super amazing work providing for our furry friends so that they can have the opportunity to live a beautiful life. And if you're thinking about adopting, please do. So that's my little shout out there before we go into the heavy stuff. But I got into this work after one of my friends, and I guess I should say before we get into anything, we are going to be talking about domestic violence. We are going to be talking about sexual assaults, and we are going to be talking about sex trafficking. And those subjects are really, really hard to listen to. And so make sure, you're drinking water, you're keeping those AirPods tight in, absolutely. But also feel free to pause the episode and take a break if you're needing it, especially those of us that are surviving these really intense traumas. Sometimes it can be really important to listen to these things and to listen to other people. And I totally appreciate that. I'm very similar. I'm always trying to find other survivors in the space, but it's also important to care for yourself. We have to make sure that we are caring for ourselves. And so If you need to take a break, do it. If you have to come back to this in 2-3 days, don't feel weird about it. That's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, because we're humans, we're not robots. So remember that. But yeah, who am I? I got into this work a really long time ago because one of my friends, I was homeschooled my whole life, and my first job was where I started meeting friends for the first time outside of my family and outside of our church, because my parents were evangelical, or are evangelical Christians. And when I was growing up, I was kept away from secular society. And it was this like really big deal that, we were very careful about who we allowed me to hang out with, things like that. And when I was 16, I got a job at a local bookstore, and my first friend was a sex worker outside of my family. And it was just like such like a funny experience for my parents, I'm sure, looking back, because they're like, gosh darn it, that like she was just such a good friend for me. And I was so shy. And she just like did her thing and opened me up, and just was this like huge, bright, shining light in my life, and still is. But she let me know that she actually, after her and I were building community together and really getting to know each other more and more, she let me know that she was actually being sexually assaulted by 2 police officers in our town, Roger Manjana and Juan Francisco Lara. And when she told me, my response, due to my lived experience, was, well, we should go to the police department and write a report. Maybe they'll do something about this. And went to the police department, wrote a report, and nothing happened. Filed a complaint, nothing happened. She started making some noise herself, communicating with other folks that were already experiencing those things from these same officers, ended up meeting many people that were also being assaulted by these officers, and they were all sex workers or sex trafficking survivors that had been introduced to these officers through stings and rescues, right? That the officers were doing. And so they ended up that around, I think it was 12 people came together, came forward, finally received recognition. The cops were put into, they had to go to court, went to jail. They're still in jail. And I have issues with the prison industrial complex, but we don't have enough time for that today. But it was justice as much as like they could get, right? And the issue was, though, that those circumstances, they created a lot of trauma that the people that were in those experiences are still dealing with to this day. It's almost impossible to heal from things like that outside of community. And because of the way that we stigmatize sex work, the way that we oppress sex workers, the way that we oppress sex workers and their families and stigmatize them, it creates this like really unhealthy dynamic where people are having a hard time healing from the situations that we as a culture, as a society, are systemically putting them in. And then in 2009, I took a job at an advertising agency called Wieden & Kennedy in Portland, Oregon, after being a flight attendant and seeing a lot of trafficking on the planes before we had those placards in bathrooms that say, like, if you're experiencing trafficking, call this number. It was before then. And so a lot of the senior flight attendants would pass around USBs full of information about the cities that we were in. And they would be like, okay, go to this city. If you're in this city, go to this place. If you're in this city, go to this place. So we'd have opportunities for assistance when things were happening on our planes, which was great. But it was really like clear that there wasn't a lot out there, right, for sexual violence and domestic violence and trafficking victims. But specifically for sex workers, there was nothing available. And then, like I was saying earlier, in 2009, I took a job in advertising in Portland, Oregon, went on a run with my dog at 4:30 in the morning because we were doing a late night, as you do in advertising. Shout out to all the producers, print producers, everybody out there. But I saw somebody being punched in their side on the street at 4:30 in the morning. And I didn't carry my cell phone because in 2009, lots of people didn't, for all those Gen Zers out there. And it was really interesting to me because I ran backwards to a security guard who was working at the time and on his phone. And I was like, there's somebody being abused. We need to call 911. And he looked over my shoulder. He saw who was being hurt. And he looked at me and he smirked and he said, she's a prostitute. They're just going to arrest her anyway. And he turned
That's
around and walked away.
awful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ran to my apartment, grabbed my phone, called 911, ran back downstairs. But by the time that I had gotten back, the person was gone, and I can still hear their cries to this day. It's something that I haven't allowed to let out of my body, and I meditate on it and think about that person often, because I think that it's important sometimes that the people that our society is wanting us to forget or not think about, that we do our best to remember them. But when I came back downstairs, the police came like 15 minutes later, and I asked them, is this true? You know, this person was being abused. Would, you know, they have been arrested? And they said, well, if it is who the security guard is saying it is, then yeah, you know, we have a few warrants out for them. And so my response was like, because I didn't know very much about the police department at the time, I was like, I want to talk to your manager, because I was just so like incensed. And I talked to their manager, and who was like the lieutenant and captain and all of this. And I ended up sitting across the way within 2 weeks from the chief of police, because I just kept getting passed around to all these people. And the chief of police was a woman. Her name was Chief Rosie. And she told me that if you ever want to solve anything in this world, you need to get involved with grassroots nonprofits and work to change change legislation. So I've dedicated my life to doing both. And we were able to do some amazing things in Oregon. We passed safe harbor laws so that people are able to contact the police when they're in a situation like the woman was in the street being beaten up, and not be worried about being arrested. That being said, there's always workarounds to rules like that, right? And so we see people being arrested for loitering or things like that. And so I think it's important that we keep pushing legislation, especially, and rewriting the laws and rewriting the things that we're all abiding by, because anyway. And so I met the Cupcake Girls in February 2012, after they had started in Portland in November 2011. And Cupcake Girls had started itself in February 2011. So they had just started, and I was able to start working with a dynamic group of people that was working to do some cool things. And our society was really, really excited to be able to do that. But what was really interesting to me was the fact that the Cupcake Girls was working with sex workers and trafficking survivors. And I saw the need for that. There wasn't a lot of folks out there doing the work at the time. I was connected with Coyote, Rhode Island, who was doing the work out of New York, SWAP USA, SWAP Behind Bars. They were doing the work, and a lot of them were doing the work in different spaces. But not a lot of people who were doing work with sex workers and sex trafficking survivors at that time. And so I was really honored to be a part of that, and still am honored to be a part of this work. But that's a little bit about me. Long walks on the beach.
No,
I don't know. What do you
amazing.
say?
Like, it's so great to hear the context of like how you got involved, and also like your own personal experience with assault before as well. But also just to hear that you're really devoting your life to giving back to the community, and also really trying to support as much as you can, because as you mentioned, there isn't a lot of support, or it's very divided too, between human trafficking survivors. And again, we were talking about this really briefly before we started recording, but like, you know, the conflation between people that are being sex trafficked and also consenting sex workers. I don't know, maybe if you want to start there a little bit too, as a brief primer, because this is the second episode of season 6. I'm sure there's a lot of new folks that are here too and be like, what is the show about? But yeah, maybe we want to quickly go into that, and then kind of go into more about the Cupcake Girls organization, what they're all about too, because I only know about my research that I've done as well, but I'm sure you can word it a lot better than I can. As well.
No, I'm sure you would do an amazing job. You're so good at public speaking. I love to listen to you in your show. So there is an issue with conflating sex work and sex trafficking. And honestly, I think that a lot of it has to do with people being uncomfortable with sex and the idea that folks would have the ability to sell sex for money or sexual actions for money. It bothers a lot of people. And I think that it's important to say that whether something is comfortable for you or not does not give you the right to discriminate against other people, and to really check yourself and your internalized horophobia, essentially. Because we have an issue with consent in this society. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of people who are fighting for their rights for even abortions in our world, or fighting to be seen as humans, as people that present as female. And so I think it's really important that we as a society are really looking at why we're doing the things that we're doing and how we're treating people. Sex work isn't going anywhere. Sex workers are people that are consensually selling sex. They're deciding to do it. They're in charge of who they're who they're working with, how much their rate is. They're in charge of the times that they're working. They're in charge of who they're seeing. They're in charge of their identification and all of that. People that are being trafficked, they're being forced, coerced, or manipulated into sex work. So they are not choosing it. This is not something that they have the ability to choose. And I think it's important that we talk about the fact that, this isn't the idea. And I think most sex workers would agree with me too. The idea is never to glamorize sex work. A lot of people love being sex workers and it's so important to them. And it's been huge for their mental health. A lot of people don't. And they and they're just like their job. And it's the way that they're providing for them and their families. A lot of people it's just this situation that they're trying to leave and they cannot, because of the stigma of sex work. I was talking to somebody who is trafficked for a really long time and has a few kids and has been trying to get out of sex work for quite a long time after their trafficking experience. But because they had felonies in multiple states, they have not been able to live with their children, because when you're charged with a felony of sex work, in certain states, it's a sex crime. And so guess what? With sex crimes, you can't live with your own kids. And so those record expungements, they cost orgs like us a lot of money, and they're unnecessary, and they're harming sex workers and their families. They're harming sex trafficking survivors and their families. Because we conflate sex work and sex trafficking, we have a lot of people who are being sex trafficked who are imprisoned in their trafficking experience. First of all, we should not be arresting sex workers. We should not be putting them in jail, period. It's a mess what's happening. Sex work is a job, right? And like I was saying earlier, sometimes you love your job. Sometimes you like your job. Sometimes your job is toxic and you want to leave. And guess what? You should be able to leave that job. If you are working as an electrician, for instance, and your boss sucks and you need to get out of this situation, when you go to apply for another electrician job or decide to move categories of jobs altogether and do a complete career change, there is not a stigma there. You're able to do that and you're able to leave that toxic work situation. It is very hard for people in the sex work industry to leave a situation if it is toxic. And if we decriminalize sex work, which we're going to get into, it's going to create a lot more freedom for folks to be able to navigate those toxic situations when they happen, pull in for legal protections, but also protect themselves and their families. But yeah, sex work is a job. It's a job. It's different. It's different than a lot of jobs. And it needs to be treated like that. As we are conflating sex work with sex trafficking, we're not only harming sex workers, we're harming sex trafficking survivors. And bigger picture, we're harming the war on sexual assault. We're harming consent. We're harming the conversation of consent. If we as a society cannot wrap our heads around the differences between sex work and sex trafficking, I promise you that it is because we can't wrap our heads around the idea of consent and bodily autonomy. And so those are conversations that we need to be having more frequently.
And this is why you're on the show today, to speak about this. well, because like, again, like this is a fan requested episode, but also like a conversation that needed to be had on the show too, because I actually haven't had any organizations that help out both sex workers and also human trafficking survivors. So it's a really interesting approach that the Cupcake Girls has too. I think maybe at this point we can maybe talk about the organization a little bit in terms of like what services you might offer, but also like maybe start at where the Cupcake Girls are positioned in terms of like its values, its mission, and stuff like that. And we'll go there.
Yeah, I love it. The Cupcake Girls, we are an organization, and I've been with the Cupcake Girls for a bit, and so I'm always excited to talk about this because I think it's an important topic. But sex work and sex trafficking, they are conflated, right? And we work really, really hard not to do that. The organization of the Cupcake Girls, we are an anti-trafficking organization. And I think that that's really important to point out. So we're not solely a sex work supportive organization. That's kind of like an addition to the work that we're doing because we understand that sex workers are our greatest allies in fighting sex trafficking. They have been, they always will be. And as we work to release sex workers from oppression by changing legislation, release sex workers from stigmatization by changing legislation, we're going to see a shift in trafficking. But who the Cupcake Girls are, what we do. So we provide resources to sex workers as well as sex trafficking survivors through advocacy, through business sponsors, through business partnerships, and through financial grants. We gave out over $97,000 in financial grants last year. Those are cash grants to our participants. So people who are reaching out to us and saying, hey, I need help with rent, or hey, I need help with getting my kids' daycare paid for, or like, hey, I really want to get a washing machine or get my car fixed or whatever it might be. They'll apply for a grant, and then we work to make sure that they're able to get those funds. We also provide direct advocacy. So if people are coming to us and they're saying, I want to get my kids out of foster care, the court's saying that I can't get my kid out of foster care because I need a vanilla job, I need a working vehicle, and I need an apartment. And so we'll work with our participants to get them a vanilla job that's sex worker friendly and safe. And we'll also work with them to make sure that they're able to show up to court on time, whatever that they're needing. Maybe they're needing somebody to go with them. Maybe they're needing to get sober. And so we have inpatient and outpatient programs that are available to take them. And how we do all of this is we created a network. There's over 400 business partnerships that we have nationwide. We have people that will work with us at pro bono or discounted rates. So we're able to offer our participants things like free family lawyers, free record expungements, or discounted. We have a dentist that was working with one of our participants and was able to give them a root canal absolutely for free last week, which is really rad. Pediatricians that will work with our participants, because a lot of the times sex workers are worried to get their kid to the pediatrician because they don't know if the pediatrician's safe, right? So we want to make sure that we're relieving a lot of the stress on folks and providing these opportunities for people to be able to see providers that they're needing. And I want to make sure that it's super clear. The reason that Cupcake Girls, again, works with sex workers and trafficking survivors is not because they're the same thing. They're completely different things. That, and Cupcake Girls understands that when sex workers are stigmatized and oppressed in the ways that they are, which is truly because of racism, the patriarchy, colonialism, we need to be talking about this. And as we're talking about this, we need to be understanding the people that these stigmas are most impacting are Black and brown women.
Thank you for that, by the way.
And so when we're talking about the stigma that's being used in the way that our society is treating people and the systemic issues within our society, and capitalism. I forgot my second C. But we have to be talking about things and make sure that folks have the ability to have resources available for them. And so we understand that also it's important that we fight our internal racism as an organization as well. Like I'm white, and I am running the Cupcake Girls. I'm a white presenting woman, and I'm running the Cupcake Girls. And so it's really important that as I am doing this work, that I'm pulling in women of color, Indigenous women, Black women, brown women, so that they can speak into this work, so that they can make sure that we're heading in the right directions. They can correct us and hold us accountable when we're wrong, which they have done. And we're so thankful for the opportunity to innovate and apologize and move forward well as a group together. So
love that.
Yeah, a little bit about us. We provide support groups, and we have amazing advocates. We have free counseling. If folks are needing help, we also have free psychiatric services in California, Nevada, and Arizona. We're working on going throughout the United States and into Canada and Mexico as well. And so we'll keep you updated on those things. But that's a tiny little bit about it.
A tiny bit, but you offer so much, which I think is so great because, oftentimes like people don't know where to find these resources too. And they're just like lost and are left to suffer alone. And as you know, both sex work and sex trafficking or any bit of human trafficking, because there's so many different parts, can be very isolating. Very, very isolating. So it's really great that you're providing such resources for people. And a lot of it sounds like it's free, which is awesome because sometimes access can be quite difficult to come by. And especially a lot of these have like a dollar value associated with them as well. So just amazing. I'm applauding all around. So, and I'm sure like we can go into detail about everything.
Oh, I appreciate you.
But I would also like to know about the decriminalization stance that Cupcake Girls also has positioned themselves in as well. Maybe we can kind of go into that. And also, again, for those who are just kind of joining us now in season 6, there is a big difference between decriminalization, legalization, the Nordic model, and all the different kind of models that sex work operates under. Like I myself I'm in Canada, so we are under the Nordic model. A lot of the states is sex work is criminalized. So I would love to maybe hear the different nuances and also the differences as well between the 3 models. And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so it's really important that we do talk about this. Thank you so much for providing the opportunity. So decriminalization of sex work is essentially eliminating all criminal penalties of sex work. This eliminates penalties from the clients of sex workers themselves, and it also provides a lot of freedom and accessibility to law enforcement for sex workers and trafficking survivors to be able to go to the police and say, hey, this person assaulted me, or I need help. I'm in a bad situation. I was talking to somebody who was sexually assaulted on the job doing sex work in New Zealand, where sex work is decriminalized. And they were able to go to the police department and they were able to say, I was assaulted, I need help. And the police department handed them a blanket, tea, sat them down in a chair and said, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And the person actually comes from the United States and was telling the officer, like, I would never have received this treatment in the United States, where sex work is criminalized. And the officer said, well, you should. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. We're going to find the perpetrator who did this. And I would love to be able to have that kind of experience for our program participants. And unfortunately, because of the way that we treat sex workers and the way that we treat sex trafficking survivors, where I think it's important to note that in the United States, in most states, sex trafficking survivors are arrested, they're booked, they're put into jail, and they only get one phone call when they're released from jail. And that phone number that they usually know is their pimp's. And so they're arrested, they have a felony, they're put right back into the hands of that pimp. And so I think it's important to note that. The Nordic model is an interesting way that people are looking at changing sex work policies. I am completely against the Nordic model. Cupcake Girls is pro decriminalizing sex work. The only way that we see forward is decriminalizing sex work. That's the only way. Nordic model is where the clients of sex workers are criminalized, but not the sex workers themselves. And this is a completely confused, I think it's
Yeah.
well-intentioned, but it's completely confused. If you are if you're oppressing the clients of sex workers, you are oppressing sex workers. When people are not able to fully vet, if the person that's they're trying to vet for a client meeting is kind of weird and acting scared, and they're trying to negotiate condom use, for instance, if the person is like acting weird, you're not sure if they're acting weird because they're like a sketchy, scary person, or if they're acting weird because they are scared of getting arrested. And so we have to make sure that we can keep the sex workers and trafficking survivors safe in those kind of interactions. But also, I think it's important to note that when we criminalize something, we're telling the people that are safer clients, right? The people that are the more frequent and safer clients, that they can get in trouble. And so it scares people because they don't want to necessarily get in trouble. And so a lot of sex workers, they end up losing really good customers. So they end up having to deal with people that are more sketchy. And because they're not able to background check them because, the client is criminalized and the client doesn't want to do a background check because they're worried that they're going to get arrested by the police, it causes a really, really crappy situation for the sex workers. And then within the legalization model, it's really interesting because I don't know if anybody has ever had to get certified for anything, but you have to pay for a certification or a license. You have to get it renewed. And usually you have to spend time trying to get that certification or license. Well, here's the thing. If you are telling somebody who's doing sex work that is, trying to survive, especially street-based sex workers, that they have to get a license, they're going to try, of course, but they're probably not going to be able to achieve that. And within sex work communities, there's already a lot of hierarchy, is what it's called, where like we have like, the cam girls, the porn stars, white, straight, they're like the top of the hierarchy, so to speak. And then we have strippers, people that are dancing in clubs, things like that. Then we have escorts, doms, and it's just made up. It's just a system that's made up, right? But it's because of the stigma that we put on sex workers that this hierarchy even exists, which is something that we, are needing to deal with, and that sex workers internally have been struggling with for quite some time. But when we're talking about legalizing sex work, we're literally adding to that hierarchy. So we're not including people into this idea of community and allowing them to do community building together, like through decriminalizing sex work, where we're allowing that to happen. But in legalizing sex work, we're saying, you're all good people who have this license, and then all of you who aren't good people are bad people. And so essentially, like, we're doing what we're doing now, where we're criminalizing sex workers, we're criminalizing sex trafficking survivors, we're continuing this cycle of, carceral activity, which is a problem. And we need to stop that really harmful way of thinking. We really need to remember that people that are coming over, especially undocumented folks from other countries, they're fleeing really, really terrible, deadly situations. They're trying to provide for themselves and their families, and they're doing it the best way that we know how. And they don't need oppression; they need support. And so when we're looking at the different ways that we can support people, it's not by asking them to pay for a license in a language that they probably don't even know. And it's not by asking people that are in poverty, single parents trying to survive, to pay for a license that they cannot afford. We need to figure out how to make things more accessible and less harmful for folks that are in poverty, and stop criminalizing poverty, which is really what we're doing. We're saying like, oh, you figured out how to make money. We don't want you to do that. We want you to be essentially like objectified our way, because everything underneath capitalism truly is not a healthy situation anyway. People are being worked to the bone. People are not receiving the money that they deserve. There's a lot of issues within capitalism, right? So the issue, if people are having an issue with sex workers, selling sex for money, they're having issues with
Right.
capitalism. They're not having issues with sex work and sex workers. We need to make sure that we're also paying attention to clear data. The World Health Organization, Amnesty International, ACLU, and then over 250 scientists, doctors who signed a letter to President Biden in the beginning of this year, they all have said we have clear data that says that decriminalizing sex work is the only way forward. We have clear data from the World Health Organization that says that we would see a 13% decrease in HIV within our country and in the United States if we did decriminalize sex work. So there's a lot of reasons that we really need to be taking a hard look at the stigmatization that we are putting on essentially like Indigenous, Black and Brown women, truly, like, and people in poverty. We need to look at the opportunities that people have for making money, and we need to provide them with resources. And that's all done through
Yes.
decriminalization. The Nordic model, legalizing model don't work. And that is very clear through the evidence of other countries who have tried these models like Sweden and Germany. And I'm not going to go into those things, but Google them and I can send over resources to Sia so that she can put
Yeah,
them on
please.
Twitter later
Yes,
as well.
please send those to me, and I could even put them in the show notes as well. If people are like listening and want to like start reading up on that as well, check the link below, and we can definitely provide those stats over for you guys as well. But yes, thank you for such a detailed answer on that. It's so good to have a bit of a refresher every now and then because not every episode we're talking about decriminalizations. And of course, I really think I brought the right guest on because you were just so passionate about this topic too. And it really shows though, seriously, Amy, like it really, really shows too. And like that you care so much. And also with your long tenure as well with the Cupcake Girls. Cause you said you were there since 2011 almost.
2012,
Oh my
February of
gosh.
2012. So I'm celebrating 11 years
Congratulations.
this year. It's been a wild ride, let me tell
A
you.
wild and hopefully a rewarding ride as well, though. Which
Oh
I
yeah.
mean,
Oh
being with
yeah.
the organization for so long, like what can you tell us about like say like are there certain trends that you were seeing? Because I know sometimes with regionality, like it looks a little bit different as well. Like even some of the organizations that I work with here too, they're very specific on like who they work with or are able to share some of the insights of what's happening today with trafficking victims. And I'd really be curious to hear like at least like with my past conversations with past guests too, with that have been survivors of trafficking, a lot of people have this notion that trafficking always is involved with the transportation of a human being from say like point A to point B. But from the people that I've been talking to lately and in the past couple of years on the show, it's a lot of more like modern day like pimping and even like modern day slavery is what I've been hearing a lot as well. So I'm curious to hear what you found with your over a decade of experience working with those human trafficking survivors and also with sex workers.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I hear the same things that you're hearing, right? But I'm seeing something really different. So I think it's important to point out that we don't have any good data on sex trafficking because sex work and sex trafficking are conflated. I was just reviewing some data that was pulled by Dr. Barb Brentz over at University of Nevada and Nevada, Las Vegas, sorry. And Barb Brentz has been studying the trade of sex workers, and sex trafficking survivors for I think it's 2 decades now. Just a phenomenal wealth of
Dang.
knowledge that she has. And her and I are coming to the same conclusions that what we're seeing the most is actually familial trafficking. So the majority of trafficking that we see is familial trafficking. So aunties, uncles, grandmas, parents that are trafficking their kiddos or adult family for money or access to housing, things like that, drugs, things like that. And a lot of it is because that's been culturally what's been happening in their families for a really long time. And so we're having lots of conversations with people that have left things like religious cults, for instance. A lot of the times this does happen in more rural areas, but we were having conversations with somebody a few months ago that was from a rural area and they had been trafficked inside of their father's church for a really, really long time, to not only the elders of the church, but other parishioners. And it was told to this person that if they were not following the rules of the Bible, which says that women should submit, that they were out of the graces of God and they were going to hell. And so you can imagine that this kind of like religious oppression and coercion and fraud led this person to a lot of difficult choices, unfortunately, and a lot of really, really, really scary situations. And thankfully, they are safe now. It is really sad that people do this to their own families. But a lot of the times they really aren't knowing any better too, right? Like they were kind of trained to be acting in these ways, which is one of the main reasons that I'm such a big proponent for sexual education in schools, not just for straight partners, but also for, I like how I use this for straight partners. I don't even know what I was doing. But not only for straight partners, but for those of us that are in the queer community, the LGBTQ plus community. My first experience learning about sex was through porn. I wasn't really understanding what sex was, especially because of my upbringing. And especially when it came to queer sex, like trying to figure out how things worked, what things should be happening. I learned from porn, which is like totally like not, even what people in porn want you to be doing. And I think that that's a lot of the confusion too within the people that are in more of, the anti-sex work community. They're like, oh, people in porn trying to like, hurt our children. And it's like, are they? I don't think so. There's so much there to unpack anyway, but
that's another topic as well.
Like people in porn don't even want kids. Dude, there's another whole podcast. But yeah, it's really interesting because when we're talking about trafficking, there have been a lot of misinformation and a lot of frustrations that I have. They come from the internalized biases that a lot of us have against trafficking survivors in general. As a society, we have an issue with people that are getting sexually assaulted. We see like, oh, what were they wearing? Oh, they shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have been drinking, things like that. Well, it is like that times 3,000 when we're talking about people that are either being sex trafficked or in sex work, because people that are being sex trafficked, they if they are in these romantic situations, which is what you were talking about, when they believe like that they're in love, that they love this person, it's their boyfriend, their wife, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their partner. A lot of folks in the LGBTQ plus community, that are non-binary, they're in these situations. They love this person and they would do anything for them, and they just want to please them. And when that relationship starts, it's a lot of love bombing, it's a lot of gifting, it's a lot of doing anything for them. And then all of a sudden, everything gets pulled away and the abuse starts, and you just want it to be good again. And you just want to do whatever you can for it to be good again. And the people that are trafficking folks, they know instinctually how to give just a little bit more love or attention or whatever, in order to keep that person entrapped in this relationship. And so what we call it is chains on the brain. So it's not necessarily physical chains, but it's really psychological chains on your brain. And as somebody who's come from a domestic violence situation myself, I can assure you it is very confusing when somebody is telling you that they love you and that they would do anything for you, and then they're choking you. It's a very confusing situation, and it's very volatile for people that have not had a lot of community support. So when we're seeing people that are going into sex trafficking, from what Cupcake Girls are seeing, 3 out of every 4 of our participants are coming directly out of the foster care system. So we're seeing people aging out of foster care. They haven't had family support. They haven't had that community. They're being stripped away from their families, their community support. They're put into homes, usually with folks that aren't necessarily culturally relevant to them and their experience, right? And so they feel really confused and they feel really alone. We see a large amount of LGBTQ plus youth that are homeless because they were kicked out of their parents' house. They're placed in a foster care situation. They're kicked out of the foster care situation because people don't honestly give a shit about the queer community, which is another messed up issue of itself. And we see all these youth that are homeless that are trying to figure out ways to survive, and they meet somebody that tells them that they love them and that they would do anything for them. And those youth and young adults and the people that we work with, they will fight for that love, and they will do anything that they can to keep that love because it's the only real family that they've
Oh,
ever known. And so when we're talking about trafficking, yeah, it looks a little bit different than
yeah,
Taken, that movie. And I don't I don't want to say that like people aren't, kidnapped, kept in basements, dog cages, closets. We see that stuff more
no.
often than I would like. But the majority of trafficking is familial trafficking, and it's
Wow,
usually
yeah,
generational. So,
it's very eye-opening.
kiddos trafficked, parents trafficked,
Right.
things like
Thank you
that.
so much for sharing, because that's like new information for me, and I'm like just flabbergasted to hear about that, but also makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, it's just tragic. No matter how you get caught up in that, it
Yeah.
just it's awful, which is really shitty to hear. But thank you so much for sharing just all the information. It's just such a great piece, because like I feel like if I haven't heard about it, like I'm sure a lot of people haven't heard about that kind of perspective as well. So thank you again, Amy. Another piece I do want to bring up too is the concept of saviorism as well, which kind of goes hand in hand with both sex work and also trafficking as well. So, gosh.
Well, let's cover the trafficking part first, because I feel like that's a little bit easier sometimes for me to communicate, and then we'll get into the sex work piece, because I'm sure even you have had situations where people are like, "Let me
Yes,
take you
a
away
lot
from
of that.
this."
A lot of that.
Oh, so a lot of the times, especially, I've been working in anti-trafficking, right, since 2006, for so a really, really long time, and I've worked with multiple anti-trafficking orgs, and I will tell you that the vast majority of anti-trafficking orgs out there, they are faith-based. And so they're either some sort of religious base, but majority are
Mhm.
Christian. And so a lot of people in Christian communities, they will be working to get people out of sex trafficking and having this idea that they're there to save them. And so we see a lot of demonizing of sex work in those experiences, that these people are stuck, and we see a lot of conflation of sex work and sex trafficking in these
Right.
experiences. I see a lot on in the anti-trafficking world. If you go onto people's websites, it says working to free people from sexual
Yeah.
exploitation, which is really interesting
Right.
wording. And so really misunderstanding the fact that, and it's honestly very paternalistic, and honestly like very, well, it's downright
Yeah.
rude. It's downright rude, and it's dehumanizing to assume that you would know better than the person who's in their
Yes. Thank
experience. Um, which is why Cupcake Girls make sure that we never, ever, ever will label somebody as being trafficked. We allow people to label themselves. I am not in anybody's shoes. I don't know what they're
Yeah.
experiencing, but they do. I don't know what the best way is for somebody to live out their life. I don't know if, they're even ready to leave their trafficker. And I think that that's something that's really important to point out too. It's hard to leave your trafficker sometimes. People have to
Yeah.
plan for that shit. I mean, we have people that have had kids with their traffickers, right? And like, if you leave your trafficker and you have kids with your trafficker, you've got a felony list as long as your arm, and your trafficker doesn't have anything and probably is in a position of
Hmm.
power. They will take you to court and they will win. They'll win your children and you will have nothing. And so it's really important that we do plan for these experiences, and we allow people to understand and hold space for their own experiences. When we're talking about saviorism and anti trafficking, we're talking about people who probably, if they are survivor led, had really terrible experiences
Yes.
in sex work, and those experiences are the lens that they're seeing the world through. And so they really want to make sure nobody ever has the
Hmm.
experiences that they did. And they want to see them exiting trafficking because it was what they felt was the best thing for them. And I want to caution people that are in those experiences. I am not a sex trafficking survivor, and I am not a sex worker, and so I want to make sure that I'm speaking from those places, and that's clear. But as somebody who's working with both, I see the harm that's caused when we're conflating two and we're pushing people into a standard of living that we've decided works for us without understanding the culture that the person's coming from. We don't know what's best
Thank
for
you.
other people. Um, there's a lot of frustration that I have within that. Exodus Cry is an organization that I call out quite often because they're raking in millions of dollars and putting out these documentaries trying to prove that sex work is
Yeah.
sex trafficking, and that sex work is killing people, and that sex work is so harmful. And you know what? Everybody at Exodus cry. If you don't want to do sex work,
Yeah.
don't do it.
Yes.
Easy. If you have people coming to you and they want to be not working in sex work, awesome, help them. But if all of your money is going towards documentaries where you're spending millions and millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars paying your staff, and none of that money is going to survivors of sex trafficking, look at yourself in the mirror and do something
Yes.
different.
Yes. It's a lot of scare
Yeah, it's a
tactics. I know
problem.
I've seen a lot of their stuff on Twitter that a lot of people are like, this is so wrong and so backwards. And like, how can these people still continue to exist? And as you mentioned, like, who gives you the right to like for those people that are part of these religious type of organizations, like you have no idea what it's like to be in our shoes, and for you to kind of claim that you
Yeah.
think you know what's best for us is like a large overstepping, in my opinion. Yeah.
Totally. And you know what? There are plenty of people that are not happy in sex work and they want to get out. And great. Please find a spot. Please find somebody who can help you. The Cupcake Girls helps people exit the industry if that's something that they're wanting to do. But the thing is that, like, we understand that sex work is work. We're pushing for decriminalizing sex work. We know that people are very happy and healthy in their jobs as sex workers. We know that they're amazing parents, that they're phenomenal friends, that they're amazing human beings. My closest friends are sex workers. I think it's really important that we point out the beauty, that comes from bodily autonomy, and the beauty that comes from people being able to make choice over their own decisions. And again, this isn't about glamorizing sex work. Like I said, all sex workers want, from my experience, all sex trafficking survivors want, from my experience, is just to receive resources so that they can build the life that they're wanting. It's just to receive a life free of stigma and oppression. And that's not too much to ask.
It's just not. Like, I feel like as soon as we start to legitimize our professions, a lot of people will start to, feel like this is normal. And hopefully people will follow suit and also like treat us like human beings. That is hopefully a goal one day.
Yeah, 100%. And it's going to allow a lot of people who have been living in the shadows
Wow.
to come out into the light and not feel scared to do that for risk of losing
Good
their
job.
children or their jobs. Like we see all the time, people that will like post on social media, um, that they got a teaching job, and then people do Google dives on them and then find out, oh, they had an
Yeah.
OnlyFans way back in the day. And so, like, or currently have an
Yeah.
OnlyFans, who gives a shit? And then all of a sudden, like, we hate them or whatever. It's bogus. But I think the one thing that I think is really, really important that I point out when we're talking about saviorism is, do not support a nonprofit, any nonprofit, unless you've looked at their 990. A 990 is essentially a nonprofit's report card. So you can see how much money that nonprofit is bringing in, how much they're fundraising, how much they're spending on their executive director, which is nauseating if you take some time to look at it. I've seen anti-trafficking orgs, domestic violence orgs, with these like EDs that are making, I kid you not, like over $300,000 or close to
What?
it. And
Nonprofits?
they're
That's
paying
crazy.
yeah, they're paying their entry level folks minimum wage. Ooh, and the entry level
To be
folks are the
fair.
people that are actually working with survivors, and the entry level folks are probably survivors
Totally.
themselves, right?
Oh,
And so what they're doing is they're not providing adequate support to the survivors, even in their own community, right? Even in their own organization. So look at the 990, look at how much the executive director makes, call the nonprofit, ask them how much their entry level staff makes, ask them how much the folks that are working with the survivors make, and then decide whether or not you want to donate to that nonprofit. My general rule of thumb is if the ED or CEO is making 2.5 times more than the lowest paid person on staff, do not donate to that nonprofit. They are literally causing the problem that they're perpetuating to solve. When you have somebody who's working for really, really low wages, like if you want to have an ED that's making 300,000, cool, but like make sure that your people are getting
yeah,
paid
totally.
more at least. Um, but the situation that happens is when you have somebody that's working an entry-level job for that rate, they're probably
Yeah,
working multiple jobs. And if they have kiddos, the kiddos are left alone for long
totally.
periods of time. And the parents are tired, so they're not as able to really be looking at like social media, things like that. What can end up happening is we're actually putting these kiddos in vulnerable positions where they can be trafficked. So we're essentially like causing the problem that we're perpetuating to solve. So I want to make sure that that's super
Yeah, no, I'm
clear
really glad you brought that up because, like,
as well.
that's something that a lot of people, especially when they're trying to donate to causes, and there's a lot of call outs for organizations like, we need donations, we need donations. And some people just don't know, like, hey, like, who's actually legit and who's not. So that is a really, really hot tip. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. That's a huge, huge takeaway for the episode as well. But Amy, before I let you go, there are some questions that came in from our audience as well that maybe we can have some time to answer, and we'll kind of go into that. This one came in, let's do it. This one is a great question. This person came from Twitter. Do they have a hard time getting donors since they now openly support the decriminalization of sex work? This person also writes, also, I've heard that nonprofit organizations are excluded from government grants if they openly support decrim.
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Yeah. So when we openly came out in support of decriminalizing sex work in July of 2021, we lost half of our monthly donors. We lost just over half of our funding, and we did a lot of grinding work in order to make sure that we weren't having to let any of our participants go from our program. And we didn't. Thankfully, we were able to hold on to all the participants that we were working with. It did mean that the staff had to make sacrifices, right? And that was super unfortunate, but we're proud to stand by what we said about decriminalizing sex work. It's not only valuable, it's necessary. You are excluded from most grants when you do support sex workers in general. Decriminalizing sex work is an interesting thing because it's not a topic that a lot of grantors or foundations really even understand yet. And when it comes to the money, you kind of tell people what they're asking for and you don't really give them more information that they need. General rule of thumb also when you're going to court, FYI. So I think it's interesting because the Cupcake Girls actually just received its first federal grant. It's a housing grant. We're going to be getting $395,000 for housing in the state of Nevada starting in 2024,
Congrats.
which is really exciting. That all being said, I think the interesting thing is that when we're talking about decriminalizing sex work, because we're an anti-trafficking org and because the majority of people who are understanding the anti-trafficking and interested in anti-trafficking are people that are in those Christian cultures, they don't really understand what decriminalizing sex work means because they've been taught to demonize sex workers for so long. And what I've really experienced is the beauty of having those one-on-one conversations with so many of our donors and them getting it and them turning around and saying like, this is important. This is rad. My mom is like a really good example. She's one of our biggest monthly donors. And she did not get decrim at all at first. And then her and I were having more conversations. And she's like, oh, duh. Yeah, totally. We need to make it safer for sex workers, safer for trafficking survivors. Let's like, cool, rad. Let's do this. And we've seen a lot of other folks who would be like vetted as like conservative or things like that, right? That they've come around because at the end of the day, people don't want to see people suffering at the expense of their own understandings of like right and wrong anyway. But yes, we lost a lot of funding. We still continue to receive a lot of backlash from anti-trafficking groups. We just went to a conference in DC with the Freedom Network, and it was really interesting because there were so many anti-trafficking orgs there that were coming up to us, and they're like, we all want to say that we're for decriminalizing sex work, but we're really scared of losing funding. How do we do it? And so we're going to be doing some open, transparent conversations about how we have been working through this.
Awesome.
But the majority of anti-trafficking orgs, I would say, want to be on the same page, but they can't because of funding. And that's
like a tough chokehold to be in. That makes it really difficult. But thank you so much for like the Cupcake Girls' bravery to take a stance like that, because that's definitely not easy, especially when you lose like half of your funding from that. That's huge hit, and that can have some domino effects to those who are in your programs too, because those programs can disappear pretty quickly without that kind of funding that people might not know about. Yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
being transparent about that and answering that question. It was such a good question. I was like, I'm also curious about this as well.
We've been really grateful to receive support, just like verbal support, truly. I've gotten some amazing connections with Swap
Mhm.
Behind Bars, OSWC in Oregon, Red Umbrella Collective here in Nevada, New Moon with Savannah Sly and her team. And I think it's really important too to say that like sex workers saved Cupcake Girls. I was really nervous when we made the decision to say that we were for decrim, and I knew within my soul that it was the right thing to do. But I was nervous when I saw the money leaving, and I was like, "Gosh darn it, did I do the right thing?" And these sex workers that I really did not have deep relationships with, they all came out and they were like, "Amy, thank you. Like, let's keep going.
That's
Don't
awesome.
give up." And even on days when I was crying and scared, because I'm a single parent, like, and I'm in charge of like funding to make sure that people get paychecks too, and that our participants are able to get their services. And it was really scary. And they would call me. Literally, some people were like texting me every morning and being like, "You've got
That's
this.
amazing.
Go get it." And just the amazing support that we got from the community, from
Yes.
XBiz. Yeah, really thankful for
That's
sex
awesome. And we
workers.
will be mentioning some things about XBiz. Stay tuned to the very end of the show. But there's one more question as well. And I know we kind of already talked about it during the episode as well, but maybe we can do a quick little summary too. But this person writes in, like, why did they decide to start helping sex workers?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, the reason that the Cupcake Girls was helping sex workers was honestly for a lot of the things that I wrote a public apology for in July when I took on the role of executive, or and not in July, I think we put it out in August, but in why we made the leadership changes that we did, and the things that we were seeing. But in the beginning, I think that the mentality was purely savioristic, and that there were a lot of issues with that. And I was running our organization in Portland for quite some time, and we were battling with a lot of these issues. Um, and I've been really, really proud of our team and the way that we've decided that not only was that wrong, but that was something worth
Mhm.
apologizing for, changing the way that we're doing things internally, moving forward differently. And, I'm not saying all of this without embarrassment. I think that there's like frustration because I was not in leadership
Right.
at that time, and I was not able to like make the changes that I was wanting to see. And I think that a lot of the times there's this confusion of like, can I change things from the inside, right? How long do you stay with an org?
Mhm.
Things like that. And then when you get into these positions of power, it's important not only to like, yes, make the changes, but also be transparent
Yeah.
about them, and be transparent about what happened and why they happened, and the ways that we're moving forward better. Because we have a lot of organizations, a lot of anti-trafficking organizations with a lot of money in this country, and I want to encourage them all to do the exact same thing. Look hard at why you're doing the things that you're doing, if they're effective, if they're working, make those changes, apologize for the things that you're doing wrong, and
Mhm.
change. Just change. Change the way that you're working, be more helpful, less harmful, move forward well in our communities so that we can actually decriminalize sex work together and make a society that's safer for Black women, brown women, Indigenous women, in our societies.
Amazing. Amy, it was so much fun having you on. And also, I mean, we got into the nitty gritty of everything, and you provide so many amazing answers to everything. God, I just feel like I could keep talking to you for another hour about this. I mean, we probably can. But before I let you go, where can we find you and find more information about the Cupcake Girls?
Yeah, the Cupcake Girls can be found at www.thecupcakegirls.org. Please check us out. I also think that it's important to check out other sex worker orgs. So I want to elevate Suede Collective in Las Vegas. I want to elevate the Red Umbrella Collective in Las Vegas, OSWC in Portland, Oregon, the New Moon Project, HIPS in DC, PDX Sex Worker Collective in Portland. There's so many amazing groups out there. Swap Behind Bars. I could go on and on and on. BIPOC Collective. But check out the sex worker group, sex worker run groups that are doing amazing, important work in our communities and have been for quite some time. They're leading this conversation on decriminalizing sex work, and we're happy to follow their lead. in this
Amazing.
conversation.
And also, I know this episode's coming out a couple weeks before XBiz, which I will be at in Miami. And I also know that Cupcake Girls is also going to be there as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what we expect there from the bungalow suite that you guys will be exhibiting at?
Heck yeah. So during the swimsuit competition at XBiz, head over to the Sex Panther Cabana where we'll be giving out these cute little vibrators. They kind of look like ring pops, which I love. They're like super, super cute, tiny little vibrators. They're so cute. I love them. And these little tiny vibrators too. So cute. We'll also have a ton of swag. If you haven't seen window prism stickers before, we're going to have some like this. You put them on your window and then rainbows come through into your house, which is so fun. So we'll be giving some of those away because you can never have enough rainbows in your life. And the ones that we're bringing to XBiz, they say decriminalize sex work, which is super fun. Because why not have a rainbow that says decriminalize sex work? But really excited to see everybody there. I won't be there myself, sadly, but I have an amazing team that's going to be there. Head over to the Sex Panther Cabana, get your free vibrators, and have a blast.
Yeah, we'll see everyone at XBiz May 15 to 18 in South Beach. Cannot wait to get my little tan on. But new episodes every single Sunday. I'm going to continue trying to pump out episodes as much as I can before I get married. I literally get married 3 days after XBiz ends, so it's a crazy time right now. So I'm really hoping to get all my scheduling on track. But yes, new episodes every single Sunday, dropping at midnight. You can find me on all podcast platforms. If you do feel inclined, feel free to write us a review on Apple. That really helps a lot of new listeners discover and find the show, as well as 5-star ratings or whatever rating that you want to do. Maybe not 1 star, but truly, however, how you feel about the show. It is a free resource for any and all every single week. And if you are interested in Patreon, again, it's patreon.com/strippedbysia. My website is strippedbysia.com if you're interested in pitching yourself or you want me to bring somebody else specifically on the show. And you can contact me on Twitter and Instagram at strippedbysia. But that is all she wrote for today. Amy, thank you so much for joining me today. That is a wrap. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and letting us know all about Cupcake Girls. Thank you. You're listening to Stripped by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia. Music by Ted D. Graphic design by Maria Bellandarama, and photography by Ian Dabrin.